The massive alien vessel cut through the blackness of space, its hull scarred by millennia of interstellar travel. After 500,000 years, the Xi-4 had finally returned to Earth. 500,000 years ago, they had visited this planet, a young world teeming with promise, its primitive primates just beginning to shape their future. The Xi-4 had left, expecting to return to a flourishing civilization, a testament to the intelligence they had once glimpsed. Instead, what they found chilled them to the core. As the ship entered orbit, the crew observed a planet barely clinging to life. Vast swaths of land were barren, scorched black as if some great fire had consumed them. The oceans, once deep in blue, were now sickly and green, thick with toxins. The atmosphere crackled with unstable weather patterns, and the polar caps, which they had documented all those years ago, were now mere remnants of their former selves. The planet was dying. The Xi-4's leader, Commander Zolan, initiated a planetary scan. The readings confirmed their worst fears. The biosphere had been decimated. Species that had once thrived were gone, replaced by an unnatural silence. Even the humans, the dominant species, were missing. The great cities that should have been shimmering with lights and life were nothing but skeletal ruins, swallowed by nature or buried beneath shifting sands. Whatever had happened here was not a slow decline. It was an extinction. Zolan ordered a landing, selecting a site that once held a sprawling metropolis. The city's remains were haunting. Skyscrapers stood half-toppled, their glass exteriors shattered, their steel frameworks rusted and crumbling. Streets were littered with the remnants of human existence, abandoned vehicles, remnants of communication devices, and faded signs warning of disasters long past. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something unnatural. As the team advanced deeper into the ruins, they stumbled upon something strange. A structure, unlike the others, remained perfectly intact. It was a massive facility, its walls smooth and untouched by time. Strange symbols, unlike any human language, were carved into the entrance. With a wave of his appendage, Zolan commanded the doors to be opened. Inside, they discovered something horrific. Thousands of humanoid figures were lined up in rows, perfectly preserved in glass chambers. Their bodies were frail, their eyes sunken, yet their faces were frozen in expressions of pure terror. Some chambers had been shattered from the inside, leaving nothing but skeletal remains on the cold floor. It was not just a tomb. It was a prison. A low hum echoed through the structure, and suddenly, the lights flickered to life. A message played in a garbled voice, barely decipherable, but the meaning was clear. This was humanity's last desperate attempt to escape something. Not a war. Not a natural disaster. Something far worse. The Xi-4 had not just returned to a dead world. They had returned to something waiting in the dark. And it had noticed them. Point 1. Earth is a wasteland, the planet is nearly unrecognizable, with toxic oceans, barren lands, and ruined cities. 2. Humanity is extinct, no signs of life remain, except for preserved bodies in mysterious containment chambers. 3. An unknown threat lingers, a hidden force caused humanity's downfall, and it has now noticed the Xi-4. The alien vessel hovered over Earth, scanning the surface with precision. The planet they had once visited 500,000 years ago was now a shadow of what it had been. Vast landscapes stretched below them, but instead of thriving forests and sprawling cities, they saw devastation. The lush greenery that had once covered the continents was reduced to dry, cracked wastelands. Some areas appeared scorched, as if immense fires had swept across them, leaving behind only charred remnants of life. Others had been swallowed by encroaching deserts, dunes shifting where rivers and lakes had once flourished. The air shimmered with rising heat, the land seemingly suffocating under an atmosphere that had turned hostile. The oceans, once deep and vibrant, now looked thick and lifeless. Their waters were a murky green, poisoned by centuries of contamination. Great patches of algae choked the surface, spreading like a disease, and beneath them, the remains of sunken structures jutted out like tombstones of forgotten civilizations. The shores bore the scars of rising tides and storms that had carved jagged lines into the coastlines. Cities that had once stood proudly along the water's edge had crumbled, their remains slowly being reclaimed by the encroaching sea. The planet's atmosphere, once rich with oxygen and balanced for life, now crackled with instability. The skies above were filled with thick, swirling clouds that cast eerie shadows over the land. Lightning forked through the heavens with unnatural frequency, illuminating the twisted remains of what had once been great metropolises. Windstorms howled through the skeletal remains of buildings, whipping up dust and debris as if the very air itself were rebelling against the ruin below. Scanning further, the vessel detected radiation zones scattered across the continents. Some glowed faintly, remnants of past cataclysms, while others pulsed with unnatural energy. What had once been centers of human civilization were now silent graveyards, poisoned by forces unknown. The land bore deep scars, massive craters that suggested explosions of immense power. In some regions, strange formations of metal and concrete stood fused together, melted into grotesque shapes as if subjected to unimaginable heat. The great cities, once bustling with billions of human lives, had become hollowed-out ruins. Buildings stood as crumbling monuments, their glass shattered, their steel frameworks rusting away. Roads, once filled with the constant motion of vehicles, lay cracked and buried beneath layers of dust and debris. Bridges hung in ruins, their skeletal remains jutting out over dry riverbeds. Structures that had once reached toward the sky now leaned at unnatural angles, ready to collapse with the next tremor of the unstable earth beneath them. Nature had begun reclaiming some areas, but not in a way that suggested renewal. Vines twisted through broken windows, but they were dry and brittle. Strange, mutated plants sprouted from the cracks in pavement, their colors unnatural, their forms distorted. There was no sign of birds, no hum of insects, no rustle of small creatures moving through the ruins. The silence was complete. As the fleet moved through the void, Earth finally came into view. It was still there, still recognizable, yet something was profoundly wrong. The homeworld they had once sworn to protect had changed in ways that defied logic. Sensors scanned its surface, mapping out the continents, the oceans, the atmosphere, yet every reading came back distorted, as if the planet itself resisted being fully understood. What should have been a vibrant blue and green world was now muted, the colors dulled as if the very life had been drained from it. The clouds swirled unnaturally, their formations jagged and chaotic, moving in ways that defied the natural wind currents. The oceans, once teeming with life, were nearly motionless, their waters dark and opaque, as if something lay beneath them, absorbing all light. The fleet's long-range scanners picked up remnants of civilization, massive cities that should have been bustling with life but now stood as decayed husks. Skyscrapers were twisted ruins, their steel frames exposed like the skeletal remains of some great beast. Roads, once full of vehicles and movement, were buried under layers of dust and debris. Bridges had collapsed, entire districts were submerged, and the once glorious monuments of human achievement were barely distinguishable from the surrounding wasteland. It was not simply the passage of time that had ravaged these places, something else had accelerated their decay, breaking them down in unnatural ways. Orbiting the planet were derelict space stations, many of them built during humanity's golden age. Some had been reduced to drifting wreckage, their hulls torn open by unknown forces. Others still remained intact, yet their interiors were dark, their systems unresponsive, as if the crews had simply vanished. Some of the more advanced ships in the fleet deployed scouting drones to investigate these stations, hoping to recover any logs or records that might explain what had happened. What they found was unsettling. In many cases, the stations were completely devoid of bodies, no sign of struggle or evacuation, only empty corridors, abandoned control rooms, and personal belongings left behind, as if the occupants had disappeared in an instant. Further scans of the planet revealed movement. Despite all logic, something was still alive down there. Heat signatures flickered across the ruined cities, deep within the forests, and even in the barren wastelands where no life should have survived. The readings were inconsistent, shifting erratically as if the entities themselves could not decide whether they existed in the physical world or not. Some were humanoid in shape, others were massive, towering figures that roamed the ruins without purpose. Their forms were blurred, indistinct, refusing to be fully captured by the fleet's scanners. Attempts to lock onto them for deeper analysis resulted in static interference, as if something was actively disrupting the data. Then there were the anomalies, zones where time and space seemed fractured. Some regions of the planet showed signs of immense war damage, but the wreckage did not belong to any known human military force. Weapons that had never been designed by human hands lay scattered across the battlefield, fused into the ruins as if they had been there for eons. In some places, entire structures seemed frozen in time, untouched by decay, standing impossibly pristine among the destruction. Other areas were the opposite, places where time had accelerated unnaturally, reducing entire cities to dust in patterns that did not match natural erosion. The fleet's most advanced sensors struggled to process these abnormalities, detecting fluctuating gravitational fields, electromagnetic pulses, and bursts of unknown energy signatures. Among the most disturbing discoveries was the atmosphere itself. It was breathable, still capable of sustaining life, yet laced with something unidentifiable. The chemical composition had shifted slightly, containing traces of an element that did not exist in any known periodic table. It wasn't radioactive, nor was it overtly toxic, but it was present in everything: the air, the water, the soil. It was as if the entire planet had been subtly rewritten, altered at a fundamental level. The realization sent a ripple of unease through the fleet. Earth was not just abandoned or destroyed. It had been changed. Communications officers aboard the lead ships attempted to make contact with anything that might still be human. Standard frequencies were broadcasted, emergency signals were sent out, coded messages from past centuries were deployed. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, after hours of waiting, something responded. A single transmission, weak and broken, its language distorted but still recognizable as an old Earth dialect. The voice on the other end was strained, filled with something beyond fear. The words were scrambled, but one phrase repeated over and over, barely audible through the interference. "You shouldn't have come back." The fleet remained in high orbit, scanning the planet with every tool at their disposal, yet the readings made no sense. Earth was alive but wrong. The voice that had spoken to them through the broken transmission had fallen silent, as if it had never existed. Attempts to re-establish contact yielded nothing but static, and no further signals were detected. The fleet's commanders debated their next move. Some argued that this was a trap, that the silence was deliberate. Others insisted that answers lay on the surface, buried beneath the ruins of what had once been home. A decision was made. Reconnaissance teams would be sent down to investigate. The first deployment consisted of unmanned drones, their advanced optics and sensor arrays sweeping the landscape. They moved through the dead cities, their cameras capturing images of destruction too precise to be natural. Buildings weren't simply decayed, they had been warped, twisted, reshaped in ways that suggested something had rewritten reality itself. Vehicles were fused into the streets as if the asphalt had liquefied and solidified around them. Statues and monuments had melted into grotesque, unrecognizable shapes. In some places, the streets ended abruptly, cutting off into sheer voids, perfectly smooth edges leading to nothingness, as if parts of the world had been erased. The drones moved cautiously, scanning for life signs. Some registered flickers of movement, but whenever they turned to investigate, they found nothing. Shadows stretched in the wrong directions. Buildings that should have been abandoned had flickering lights deep within, though no power sources were detected. The air itself carried a hum, a low-frequency vibration that did not originate from any known source. Even the most advanced AI-driven machines in the fleet began reporting errors, their systems unable to process the inconsistencies they were detecting. After hours of silence, one drone finally located something. A humanoid figure, standing motionless in the middle of what had once been a crowded city square. The figure was barely visible, its form distorted, as if it existed in two places at once. Its body flickered, shifting between solid and translucent, resisting full visual confirmation. When the drone attempted to move closer, its systems immediately failed. Every camera, every sensor, every communication link was severed in an instant. The drone's final transmission before shutting down was a single frame of footage, too corrupted to be deciphered, but one thing was clear: the figure had turned to look at the drone just before it vanished. The fleet's commanders debated whether to send a manned expedition to the surface. The risks were obvious, but leaving without answers was not an option. A specialized team was assembled, elite operatives in armored suits capable of withstanding extreme conditions. They descended in a dropship, landing near the ruins of what had once been one of Earth's greatest cities. As they stepped onto the surface, their suits immediately registered abnormalities in gravity, temperature, and time flow. The world beneath their feet felt unstable, as if it were shifting between realities. Moving carefully through the ruins, they saw firsthand what the drones had reported. The warping of structures, the impossible physics, the eerie silence. They found remains, not of bodies, but of something else. Human shadows burned into the walls, as if a great blast had struck, yet no evidence of an explosion remained. Frozen in their final moments, these shadows depicted scenes of people running, reaching, screaming, yet the ground where their bodies should have fallen was empty. It was as if they had been erased from existence, leaving only the echoes of their last moments behind. The team pressed forward, their sensors struggling to process the environment. The deeper they went, the more the city seemed to resist them. Pathways looped in on themselves, leading them back to places they had already passed. Buildings that had been destroyed in one moment stood perfectly intact the next. Time did not function as it should. The commander of the team, experienced in countless planetary missions, felt something he had never encountered before, an overwhelming sense that they were being watched. Then, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from every direction. The operatives activated their communication filters, but the voices persisted, growing louder. They weren't speaking any known language, yet something about them felt familiar. Each soldier heard something different, fragments of conversations from their past, voices of people long dead, commands they had once obeyed. The voices weren't external, they were inside their minds. One of the operatives collapsed, clutching his helmet, screaming that he could see them. The others tried to help, but their suits registered no external threats. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, he was gone. His vitals flatlined, his body vanishing as if he had never been there. All that remained was his shadow, burned into the ground. The team tried to retreat, but the city was no longer the same. The streets had shifted, the buildings had closed in around them. They ran, their HUDs flashing warnings, their communications breaking apart. Their dropship, which had been waiting for them at the landing site, was no longer responding. The pilot was gone, his last recorded words distorted and incomprehensible. Through the chaos, one soldier managed to transmit a final message back to the fleet. His voice was barely recognizable, filled with static and something else, something that made it sound as if he was speaking from somewhere far beyond. Only a few words were clear before the transmission ended. They are still here. They never left. The fleet's high command reviewed the final transmission from the lost ground team, the words still echoing through the war room, they are still here. They never left. It was a chilling statement, one that carried weight far beyond the mere loss of personnel. The situation on Earth had spiraled beyond expectation. What should have been a straightforward reconnaissance mission had become something else entirely, an encounter with an unknown force that defied logic, technology, and understanding. Yet, despite the warnings, despite the overwhelming anomalies, the need for answers outweighed the fear. A second operation was planned, this time with more personnel, heavier equipment, and specialized countermeasures. The mission would be twofold: recover any possible survivors and extract data that could explain what had happened to Earth. The fleet's scientists and strategists devised an approach using experimental technology designed to stabilize unstable environments. Devices capable of disrupting electromagnetic anomalies, time distortions, and gravity shifts were prepared for deployment. Aboard the lead carrier, the highest-ranking officers watched as their best soldiers prepared to descend into the unknown. The dropships cut through the thickened atmosphere, their shields pulsing as they passed through waves of interference. The closer they got, the more erratic their instruments became. Altitude readings fluctuated wildly, onboard computers registered impossible weather patterns, and some crew members reported hearing voices whispering through their comm channels, voices that should not have existed. But there was no turning back. The moment they touched down, the air felt heavy, charged with something invisible yet undeniable. The teams deployed in formation, weapons ready, scanners sweeping the surroundings. The ruins of the city stretched before them, an eerie landscape of collapsed skyscrapers and warped structures. The ground was littered with remnants of the past, vehicles left abandoned mid-motion, storefronts still displaying merchandise long untouched, personal belongings scattered as if people had vanished in the middle of their daily lives. As the soldiers moved through the city, the first signs of the previous team's fate became apparent. Equipment lay abandoned, their signals still broadcasting yet untouched by human hands. Helmets and armor pieces, some still locked in combat stances, were eerily clean, as if their wearers had simply ceased to exist within them. There were no signs of battle, no burn marks, no blood, just the unsettling absence of those who had once occupied the space. One of the lead operatives activated a signal trace, attempting to locate the exact point of the last transmission. The pulse revealed something unexpected. Deep within the heart of the ruined city, an energy signature pulsed in perfect rhythm, as if alive. It wasn't a distress signal, nor was it a natural phenomenon. It was something else, something waiting. They proceeded toward it with caution, their steps echoing in the hollow silence. Every so often, movement flickered in the periphery of their vision, but nothing was there when they turned. Shadows stretched unnaturally, shifting without a light source to guide them. The deeper they ventured, the more the city seemed to react to their presence. Buildings rearranged themselves when they weren't looking. Streets that had been clear moments before became blocked by debris that hadn't been there. Time did not flow properly. One operative swore he had seen his own squad moving ahead, only to realize they were still behind him. Then they saw it. A structure stood in the exact center of the disturbance, one that had not been there according to old maps. It was not a ruin like the others. It was pristine, untouched by decay or time. Its walls pulsed faintly, like the slow breathing of a sleeping giant. The entrance loomed before them, a doorway without a door, leading into darkness. Orders were given. Half the team would remain outside, monitoring the area, while the rest ventured inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything changed. The silence was replaced by a deep, rhythmic sound, almost like a heartbeat. The walls of the structure were lined with strange markings, symbols that did not belong to any known human civilization. The deeper they went, the stronger the sensation of being watched became. At the end of the corridor, they found what had been calling to them. A massive chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows, its floor covered in an intricate pattern of symbols that pulsed with energy. In the center of the room stood a figure. It was humanoid in shape but wrong in every conceivable way. Its body shimmered, shifting between forms, flickering between solid and translucent. It had no distinct face, yet they knew it was looking directly at them. A soldier raised his weapon, but before he could react, his body seized up. His movements slowed, his breathing became labored. The air around them thickened, pressing down with a force they could not resist. The entity did not move, yet something unseen held them in place. Then, the whispers returned. This time, they were deafening. Voices speaking in every language, some ancient, some unknown, all overlapping in an endless cascade of sound. The operatives struggled to remain conscious as the words filled their minds. Memories surfaced, memories that were not their own. They saw glimpses of a world long before their time, a time when Earth had not belonged to humanity alone. A time when something else had ruled. The weight of the revelation struck them all at once. The truth had been buried, forgotten, rewritten by history. But Earth had never truly been empty. The ones who had come before had never left. They had simply been waiting, watching, preparing. The chamber pulsed, and the whispers ceased. A single phrase echoed in their minds, not spoken aloud, but pressed into their very thoughts. A warning, a command, a truth that had been hidden for far too long. Outside, the soldiers who had remained by the entrance felt the ground tremble beneath them. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with something else, something vast, something awakening. The fleet in orbit detected a surge of energy unlike anything they had encountered before. Systems failed, engines faltered, weapons refused to function. The planet itself was reacting. The ones who had been lost had not been taken. They had been transformed. And now, the process was beginning again. The fleet's commanders stood in tense silence, watching the readings from their ships' sensors. Earth was no longer the planet they had once known. It was something else now, something beyond understanding. The anomaly at the heart of the ruined city was growing stronger, sending out pulses of energy that rippled through space itself. Distortions in reality twisted the surface, bending light and time in ways that should not have been possible. The mission had changed. This was no longer about exploration. This was about survival. The flagship's main bridge was filled with a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. The admiral, a hardened veteran of countless battles, stood with his arms crossed, watching the data stream across the holographic display. It didn't make sense. Gravity fluctuations were off the charts, entire regions of the planet were vanishing and reappearing, and worst of all, there were signals that should not exist. Voices layered over one another, speaking in languages both known and long forgotten, whispering through the static. The officers debated their options. A full-scale withdrawal would be the logical choice, but something held them back. Something in the energy readings suggested that whatever was happening here was not contained to Earth alone. It was spreading, a slow but inevitable wave pushing outward. If they left now, they might be able to escape it. But they would also be dooming every other world in its path. That was not an option. On the surface, the advanced teams pushed further into the heart of the disturbance. Their equipment barely functioned. Weapons flickered in and out of existence, communications were unreliable, and even time itself felt fractured. Some operatives reported experiencing moments of déjà vu, seeing events before they happened or remembering things that had not yet occurred. Others spoke of glimpses into something else entirely, visions of places beyond human comprehension, shapes and figures that did not belong in the physical world. The ruins of the city were no longer silent. The walls breathed. Shadows moved where there was no light. The air pulsed with an unnatural hum, a rhythm that seemed to align with their own heartbeats, syncing with their bodies in ways that felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. It was as if the planet itself was aware of their presence, studying them, deciding what to do with them. They pressed forward, guided by the pulsing signal emanating from the city's core. The deeper they went, the less the environment resembled the Earth they knew. Streets twisted into spirals, doorways led to places that should not exist, and distances stretched impossibly. What should have been a 10-minute walk became an hour-long trek through landscapes that defied physics. They moved in squads, each group tasked with gathering as much data as possible. Then, they found the first of the missing soldiers. Or what was left of them. At first, it seemed as if the soldier was simply standing still, his back to the approaching operatives. His armor was intact, his rifle still slung over his shoulder. But as they got closer, they realized he was not moving because he could not move. His body was frozen mid-step, locked in place as if time itself had abandoned him. His skin was pale, almost translucent, his eyes vacant. When one of the operatives reached out to touch him, his entire form disintegrated into dust, vanishing in an instant. More of them appeared as they continued their search. Some trapped in mid-motion, others contorted in impossible positions, their faces twisted in expressions of confusion or fear. It was as if they had been caught between two states of existence, neither dead nor alive, their bodies suspended in an eternal moment. The transmissions from the fleet above grew increasingly fragmented. Something was interfering with their ability to communicate. Some messages came through distorted, with voices overlapping and words spoken out of sequence. Others were eerily clear but made no sense, requests for assistance from locations that had never been visited, reports of battles that had never happened, and worst of all, messages from crew members who were confirmed to still be aboard the ships, speaking in desperate tones about things they could not have possibly seen. A decision had to be made. They could not remain in this place any longer. The anomaly was growing stronger, consuming everything around it. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and reality itself seemed to unravel. The fleet prepared for extraction, deploying emergency retrieval protocols. But as they initiated the sequence, the anomaly reacted. A massive surge of energy erupted from the city's core, sending shockwaves across the planet. Structures collapsed, the sky darkened, and the very fabric of space seemed to stretch and twist. The ships in orbit struggled to maintain stability, their systems failing one by one. Then, for the first time, they saw it. A shape emerging from the center of the anomaly. Not a building, not a machine, something else entirely. Something alive. It was vast, shifting between forms, its presence stretching beyond the limits of perception. It was not simply an entity. It was a force, something that had been buried beneath the surface of the planet for untold millennia. And now, it was awake. The remaining soldiers on the ground felt an overwhelming presence invade their minds, a consciousness far beyond their own. Their thoughts were no longer their own. Their memories unraveled, replaced by images of things that had come before, things that should not have been remembered. They saw Earth before humanity, before civilization, before even the first signs of life as they knew it. They saw a world shaped by something older, something that had never truly left. The ships in orbit detected massive energy fluctuations. The planet's gravitational field was no longer stable. Space itself was distorting around Earth, bending inward as if reality was collapsing. The fleet had one final chance to escape, but even as they prepared to leave, they knew they had already seen too much. The entity was no longer contained. Whatever had been sleeping beneath the surface of the planet was no longer dormant. And it was not just Earth that was at risk. The pulse of energy spread outward, traveling through the fabric of space, reaching beyond the solar system, sending ripples through the void. The fleet's commanders made their final decision. They activated the last remaining contingency protocol, a failsafe designed for situations that had no solution. The order was given. The ships aligned their weapons, targeting the planet itself. If they could not contain the anomaly, they would have to destroy its source. But even as the countdown began, the entity moved. It was not bound by physical space, not restrained by time. It had been waiting, watching, preparing, and as the first weapons fired, the last transmission from the surface came through. A single voice, filled with understanding, filled with horror. You were never meant to return.